Karen won't stop vandalizing Black Man's mailbox, so he made it indestructible. The metal echoed like a gunshot in the night. Jamal Carter sat bolt upright in bed, his heart pounding so hard it thudded in his ears. He hadn't been asleep long, but the sound that ripped through the silence outside was unmistakable. It wasn't thunder, not a car backfiring, not wind rattling a trash can. This was sharper, closer, personal. He reached over, grabbed his phone from the nightstand, and opened his front porch camera app. Within seconds, the screen lit up in black and white infrared, grainy at first, then clear. And there she was, Karen Mallory, middle-aged, shoulder-length blonde hair that never moved, even in wind. Always in beige slacks and oversized cardigans. Always watering her lawn like it was a national monument. And right now she was standing in front of his brand-new mailbox, bat in hand, eyes wild and focused, like she was warming up for batting practice. The camera caught everything. Her first swing hit dead center, a loud crack that made Jamal wince despite knowing what was coming. She adjusted her grip and swung again. This time the mailbox didn't give. Instead, a small burst of static sparked at the point of contact, and Karen jumped back with a yelp, shaking her hand in disbelief. Jamal's grin spread slowly. Then came the best part. Karen leaned in, peered at the mailbox, raised the bat again, and got hit with a stronger jolt from the low-voltage shock system he'd had installed just the week before. She screamed, dropped the bat, and stumbled back in a clumsy panic. Her slipper caught on the curb, and she fell hard onto the sidewalk, arms flailing. For a moment she just sat there, stunned. Then her eyes shifted upward and locked onto the blinking red light of the security cam mounted discreetly on Jamal's porch. And then she ran. Jamal watched the whole thing from bed, the laugh building inside him until he couldn't hold it in. It wasn't the fall. It wasn't even the scream. It was the expression on her face when she realized she'd been caught. That realization that she wasn't the victim anymore. She was the villain. And this time she'd just been outplayed. But that moment, that satisfaction, it had been a long time coming. 2 months ago, Jamal hadn't even thought about mailboxes. He'd just been the new guy on the block, a black man moving into a predominantly white, upper-middle-class neighborhood in Cedar Heights, Indiana. He'd bought the place in cash, thanks to years of grinding in cybersecurity consulting, and had hoped for peace, a fresh start after years of burnout in Chicago. But the mailbox was the first clue that peace wasn't on the menu. The first time he thought it was a mistake, maybe kids messing around. He walked outside with his morning coffee ready to enjoy the sunrise and found the box bent awkwardly, the door twisted. A few damp letters littered the lawn. He shrugged it off. Stuff happens. 2 days later, the entire post was leaning at a 30-degree angle, like someone had tried to pull it out of the ground. Then came the slashed mail, the missing bills, HOA letters about visual consistency and community pride. None of his white neighbors seemed to get them. Just him. Still, Jamal stayed quiet. He wasn't going to be that neighbor. He smiled, waved when people walked by, tried to stay low-key. He even replaced the mailbox 3 times, each one sturdier than the last, each one targeted again within a week. But what broke him was that night 2 weeks ago. He had just come back from dinner with an old friend and found the entire mailbox smashed to pieces. Not bent, not dented, obliterated. Bits of black metal scattered across the grass like confetti. He didn't say a word, just stood there in the moonlight, jaw clenched, as Karen watched him from across the street, arms crossed, lips curled into that smug smile that didn't even try to hide what it was. That was when he knew. This wasn't random, so he changed tactics. He bought a motion-activated camera, installed it at an angle she couldn't see, and went to work designing what he called the Fort Knox of mailboxes. He drew up specs, consulted online forums, and eventually found a custom fabricator on the other side of town who thought it was the funniest job he'd ever taken. "You serious, man?" the guy said, inspecting Jamal's sketches. "Steel plate inside a concrete core. You expecting a bomb or a baseball bat?" Jamal grinned. "Bat," repeatedly. "Damn, she got a vendetta?" "She's got entitlement. Close enough." 2 days later, the thing arrived. It took 4 hours to install, including digging a new foundation and anchoring the base in cement. The steel box was powder-coated black with sharp angles and clean lines. Modern, sleek, impossible to destroy. And inside the frame, a small surprise. A legal, non-lethal shock deterrent wired into the mailbox frame. Nothing dangerous. Just enough to make someone think twice before trying again. That night, he didn't sleep much. Not because he was worried, but because he was excited. It wasn't about revenge. It was about power, about control, about sending a message that said, "I'm not going anywhere. You don't get to run me off." And now, with Karen's scream still echoing in his ears and the footage saved in 3 different cloud backups, Jamal felt something he hadn't in a long time. Vindication. The next morning, the neighborhood was already buzzing. People stopped to gawk at the new mailbox, curious about the design, the materials. Some were impressed. Others, mostly the ones who looked like Karen, seemed unsettled. But no one said anything directly. Not yet. Karen didn't come outside that day, or the next. And Jamal? He kept sipping his coffee on the porch every morning, calm and unbothered, like nothing had happened at all. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Because people like Karen, they never stop when they get caught. They only get more dangerous. Jamal didn't expect Karen to disappear, but that's exactly what she did. For the next 3 days, her house stayed quiet, curtains drawn, no morning gardening, no prancing out in her robe to collect mail with a performative sigh like she was doing the world a favor. Just silence. A thick, watchful silence that stretched across the cul-de-sac like fog. Jamal wasn't fooled. People like Karen didn't retreat. They recalculated. On the 4th morning, he woke to the acrid smell of something sour and rotting. He stepped outside, still in gym shorts and a hoodie, and found a pile of trash bags dumped at the base of his new mailbox, split open. Garbage deliberately strewn across his lawn. Coffee grounds, banana peels, shredded paper, takeout containers, none of which were his. He looked up, slow and deliberate, toward Karen's house. Her curtains fluttered. Just slightly, enough to let him know she was watching. Jamal took a deep breath, turned, walked back into his garage, and grabbed a pair of gloves. He didn't say a word, didn't raise a fuss. He just cleaned. One by one, he picked up every piece of garbage, dropped it in a bin, and wheeled it back behind his house. Not once did he glance her way again. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. But that night, it got worse. He was sitting on the porch after dinner, scrolling through emails on his tablet, when he heard the rev of an engine, low, controlled, purposeful. A white SUV crept slowly down the street, paused directly in front of his house, and then, without warning, jumped the curb and slammed into the mailbox. There was a sickening crunch, the squeal of tires, and then the vehicle peeled off, disappearing into the night like it was part of some covert op. Jamal stood frozen, not in fear, but disbelief. His custom, steel-reinforced, shock-rigged, bolted-in concrete mailbox had just taken a hit from a moving vehicle. It hadn't budged. He exhaled slowly, walked down to inspect it. A scrape on the paint, a minor dent at the base, but still standing. Then he walked inside, opened his laptop, and queued up the security footage. There it was, full view, clear as daylight. The SUV had no plates. But the driver, he could make out a shape, hair, a familiar silhouette, Karen's adult son. Jamal remembered him from moving day, hadn't seen him since. Until now. So it wasn't just her, this was coordinated. He labeled the footage, dated it, backed it up, and then he sat back, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the screen. Karen had officially crossed the line from passive-aggressive HOA tyrant to full-on menace. The next morning, things shifted. It was subtle at first. A few neighbors avoided eye contact. One older couple, who usually waved, simply turned and walked the other way when he stepped outside. Even Camille, the sweet 20-something woman 2 houses down, didn't return his usual wave. Jamal frowned. The footage hadn't been made public. He hadn't said anything to the HOA. So why the sudden distance? It didn't take long to find out. That evening, a letter arrived, tucked into his front door, anonymous, typed, and unsigned. We've noticed an increasing pattern of tension coming from your residents. Cedar Heights values harmony. Escalation is not the answer. Please be mindful of how your actions affect the community. Jamal stared at the paper, then laughed. It wasn't the joyful kind. It was sharp, dry, exhausted. He walked it straight to the trash and dropped it in without a second thought. Later that night, Camille showed up at his door. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, glancing nervously over her shoulder. He nodded and stepped aside. They sat on the porch steps, the same place he'd watched Karen swing a bat. The same place he'd watched her son try to mow down federal-grade steel with an SUV. "I saw what happened the other night," she said after a long pause. "I saw the car." Jamal turned to her. "You got it on camera?" She shook her head. "Number. But I was walking my dog. I ducked behind the hedge when I saw the car coming. I didn't want them to see me." Jamal clenched his jaw but said nothing. "I'm sorry," she continued. "I should have spoken up sooner. I just didn't want to get dragged into it. Karen runs half the HOA. She gossips. She turns people against you. It's easier to stay out of her way." "But you didn't tonight," he said, not unkindly. "No," she said, "because this isn't okay." He gave her a tired smile. "No, it's not." Camille hesitated. "Do you have proof?" Jamal opened the security app and showed her the footage from the SUV hit and run. Her eyes widened. "She's going to lose her mind if this gets out." "I'm counting on it." She looked at him carefully. "What are you planning?" He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, he said, "I'm going to make sure she can't touch me again. Legally, publicly, permanently." Camille looked both relieved and terrified. "Just be careful. People like her, they don't play fair." "I don't need her to play fair," Jamal said, standing. "I just need her to lose." That night, he made a call to his friend Nate, an attorney who specialized in neighborhood disputes. By morning, they had already started drafting formal complaints, not just for vandalism, but harassment, targeted intimidation, and endangerment. Jamal didn't want revenge. He wanted resolution. But Karen, she was about to learn that some men don't back down, some men don't flinch. Some men, when pushed far enough, build a fortress and dare you to try them again. And she just hit a wall, literally and legally. By the end of the week, Jamal's front lawn had become a silent battleground. Every morning he walked out with his coffee and stared at that mailbox like it was a flag he refused to let fall. And every morning neighbors cast glances from behind curtains or while jogging past, their expressions a mix of curiosity, discomfort, and something harder to name. Guilt, maybe. Karen hadn't tried another direct hit since the SUV stunt, but the attacks didn't stop. They just shifted, turned psychological. Twice Jamal found anonymous flyers in his mailbox, accusing him of bringing down the tone of the neighborhood. They were typed in bold caps, printed cheaply and unsigned. A third was slid under his door. Maybe Cedar Heights isn't the right place for someone like you. That one hit different, not because it surprised him, but because of how familiar it was. He'd grown up in Milwaukee, where subtle racism wore polite masks and smiled while it cut you. He'd made it through engineering school, where professors praised his articulate speech. He'd sat in boardrooms where he was the only black face and had to listen to HR explain why he'd been passed over for promotion by someone less qualified. He knew the pattern, the gaslighting, the denial, but he hadn't moved to Cedar Heights to make friends. He'd moved for peace, for space, for something stable. Now it felt like he was being tested. Again. Late Friday afternoon, Camille knocked on his door. She held a paper grocery bag and wore an expression like she wasn't sure she should even be there. "Made too much jambalaya," she said awkwardly. "Figured you might want some." Jamal blinked, then opened the door wider. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said, stepping inside, "but I wanted to." They ate at the small kitchen table by the window, the kind of casual dinner where silence didn't feel awkward. Camille talked about her job as a physical therapist, the elderly clients who cracked jokes and flirted without shame. Jamal listened, grateful for the normalcy. Halfway through the meal, she paused. "I talked to a couple neighbors," she said, stabbing at her rice. Quietly. Just asked what they thought about what's been going on. Jamal looked at her. "And? They know," she said. "Even the ones pretending not to. Some have seen her." One guy admitted Karen tried to get him to join the HOA's special committee to monitor unruly behavior. Whatever that means. "She said that?" Jamal asked, eyebrows raised. Camille nodded. "You're not the first person she's gone after, Jamal. Just the first who didn't back down." That landed. He leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of it settle. "I filed an official complaint this morning," he said. "With Nate's help, the HOA, local law enforcement, even a civil rights nonprofit that tracks targeted harassment cases. I've got documented proof, video, statements." Camille stared at him, equal parts impressed and worried. "She's going to lose it." "I know. Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready for a long time." The following day, a letter from the HOA arrived, hand-delivered, sealed, and worded with false politeness that practically dripped off the page. It invited him to a community mediation session to discuss ongoing tensions and potential behavioral conflicts. Jamal laughed out loud when he read it. He didn't need mediation. He needed accountability, but he agreed to attend. Not because he wanted to, but because sometimes you had to show up to remind people you wouldn't be moved. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a brick building at the edge of the neighborhood that usually hosted yoga classes and seasonal potlucks. When Jamal walked in, every conversation stopped. Karen sat near the center, flanked by 2 HOA board members. Her expression was pure ice. Nate came with him, dressed sharply in a navy suit and carrying a thick binder. He smiled like a man who loved a good fight. The mediation began with pleasantries, empty talk about concern for harmony and respectful communication. Then Karen launched into her version of events, how she'd been targeted, how Jamal had intimidated her with surveillance, and how the mailbox incident had been an unfortunate misunderstanding. Jamal didn't flinch. When it was his turn, Nate stood and calmly played the footage. The bat, the trash, the SUV, the spark. Karen's scream. Silence fell like a bomb. No one said a word as Karen's face flushed, then turned ghostly pale. One board member shifted uncomfortably. Another coughed into his hand. Camille, sitting in the back, caught Jamal's eye and gave the smallest nod. And just when it felt like Karen might burst, Nate delivered the final blow. "We filed notice of intent," he said. "Formal complaints to the HOA, the police department, and local civil rights authorities. My client has endured targeted harassment, property damage, and racial intimidation. We expect a full investigation." Karen stood up so fast her chair screeched across the floor. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted. "He's twisting everything." But no one spoke. No one defended her. Jamal stood slowly, his voice calm, controlled. "I didn't come here to make enemies. I came here to live in peace. But if you try to push me out, if you think I'm someone you can break, you've miscalculated." He turned to leave. Behind him, Karen's breath hitched. This wasn't a man she could run off with side-eye and snide letters. This was a man who stood tall, even when the whole street pretended not to see. And now there was no more pretending. 2 days after the HOA meeting, everything got quiet. Too quiet. Karen hadn't made a peep since storming out of that clubhouse. Her lawn, usually manicured with obsessive precision, began to show signs of neglect. Weeds crept in at the corners. A sprinkler lay half buried in the flower bed, unmoving. For someone like Karen, that was the equivalent of waving a white flag. But Jamal didn't trust it. Silence was just the sound before another storm. Sure enough, that Thursday night, sometime past midnight, Jamal's phone buzzed with a new motion alert. He was already half awake, instincts sharp from weeks of tension. He opened the camera feed and saw it again. Karen, standing alone in front of his mailbox. No bat this time. No weapon. Just her. She stared at the steel box like it was alive. Then she turned around and walked back to her driveway. That was it. He almost dismissed it, until he saw her son's SUV cruise past the mailbox an hour later, pausing just long enough for the high beams to scan the porch. She wasn't finished. She was just shifting tactics. The next morning, Camille called. "She's been talking to people," she said, "spreading rumors, saying you rigged your mailbox to injure people. She's trying to flip the narrative." Jamal rubbed his forehead. "Of course she is. She's planning something. I can feel it." Jamal nodded. "So can I." Later that afternoon, a patrol car rolled through the neighborhood. Slowly, casually. The officer didn't get out, just drove past his house like he was taking in the scenery. Jamal watched from the front window, not paranoid, just prepared. That night, he set up an additional security camera at a higher angle, one that caught not only the mailbox, but the entire street leading up to it. If they were going to play games, he was going to cover every inch. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of silence. Then, on Saturday evening, it all came to a head. Jamal was inside on a video call with Nate, reviewing next steps on the civil case. Suddenly, the new camera feed flashed on his monitor. He turned just in time to catch the scene. Karen and 2 men, one of them her son, the other unfamiliar, standing in front of his house. The son held something bulky in his hand. A crowbar. Jamal stood so quickly his chair toppled behind him. "Nate," he said, still watching the feed. "It's happening right now." "I'm calling the cops," Nate replied without hesitation. "Do not go outside." Jamal moved to the window, heart pounding. Through the blinds, he saw the group huddled around the mailbox. The stranger raised his phone, filming it like they were documenting evidence. Karen gestured animatedly, pointing at the box. Then the son took the crowbar and jammed it into the side. There was a loud zap, a spark, and then a scream. He dropped the crowbar immediately, cursing as he stumbled backward. Karen rushed to him, yelling something Jamal couldn't hear. The third man, apparently a wannabe witness, stood frozen, unsure whether to keep filming or help. But the real twist came seconds later. A second police cruiser pulled onto the street, headlights cutting through the dusk. Karen's eyes widened as she turned toward the noise. The car came to a stop directly behind them. An officer stepped out, glanced down at the crowbar on the ground, then looked up at Karen and her companions. No one moved. Jamal didn't recognize the officer, but the nameplate read Owens. Tall, black, mid-40s, and calm in that way only experienced cops learn to be. He walked up slowly, hands resting near his belt. "Evening," he said evenly. "We got a call about some suspicious activity involving a mailbox." Karen's face twisted into the fakest concern Jamal had ever seen. "Yes, officer. Thank you for coming. This man's mailbox, it's rigged. It electrocuted my son." Owens raised an eyebrow. "You mean that mailbox on private property, the one he installed himself?" "That one?" Karen nodded furiously. "Yes. It's a safety hazard. It shocked him." The officer turned toward the box. "Well, if you were attempting to pry it open with a crowbar, ma'am, then it sounds like tampering with private property." Karen's mouth fell open. "What? No. We were trying to prove that he rigged it illegally," Owens cut in. "You're aware that Indiana law allows for low-voltage deterrence under specific safety thresholds, right?" Her confidence wavered. Well, we didn't know that. Did you have permission to touch it?" "No, but did he threaten you?" Karen hesitated. "Not directly, but—" "Then I suggest you take your son home, get that burn checked out, and reconsider your approach," Owens said. "Or we can go ahead and take a full statement." On the record, the silence hung heavy. Karen looked like she might explode. Her son was still shaking his hand. The third man quietly slipped his phone into his pocket and started backing away. Jamal stood at the window, watching it all unfold like a scene from a courtroom drama. Then Owens turned toward the camera, the one mounted above Jamal's porch, and gave a small nod. Like he knew. Like he was telling Jamal, "You did it right. Let the evidence speak." And it had. Karen stormed off with her entourage, shouting about lawsuits and unfair treatment. But no one was listening anymore. Not the neighbors, not the cops, and certainly not the mailbox, which remained untouched and unbothered. That night, Jamal sat on his porch in the quiet dark, a single light above his door casting a halo around him. Camille walked by a few minutes later and stopped at the edge of his yard. "You win," she said softly. Jamal didn't smile. "This wasn't about winning," he replied. "It was about surviving, and making sure no one else has to go through it after me." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I think you did both." By Monday morning, the footage had gone viral. It wasn't Jamal who posted it. It was someone else, likely the third guy who had been with Karen during the crowbar incident, the one who filmed the whole thing and slipped away quietly when the police arrived. Whoever it was, they uploaded the clip to Reddit with the title, "Racist HOA Lady Gets Instant Karma After Messing with Her Neighbor's Mailbox." It spread like wildfire. In under 24 hours, the video hit over 1 million views. Twitter picked it up. A local news affiliate covered the story. By Tuesday, Jamal's mailbox was more famous than most reality TV stars. And Karen? She was trending for all the wrong reasons. Comments flooded in. She had it coming. Imagine trying to break into someone's property and getting shocked like a cartoon villain. Why is it always a Karen with a crowbar? Jamal scrolled through the comments with a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. He hadn't expected it to explode this way, but it was out there now, uncut, unfiltered, undeniable. For the first time, the neighborhood couldn't look away. Camille stopped by that afternoon with a plastic container of lemon bars. "You're on Channel 7, she said, setting it on his porch table. They called it a suburban showdown with a spark. Jamal smirked. Creative. "You okay with all this attention?" He hesitated. It's a lot, but honestly, if it means people like her stop getting away with this, I'll take it. You've got support now, Camille said, lowering her voice. People are talking, and not in whispers anymore. She was right. At the grocery store that morning, two strangers had recognized him. Hey, you're the guy with the mailbox, one had said. Love the way you handled that. Respect. Back in the neighborhood, a few of the formerly silent residents began to nod at him when they passed. Small gestures, but they meant something. Jamal wasn't naive. He knew not everyone was on his side. But the silence had cracked, and for people like Karen, silence was armor. Once it fractured, they lost power. That same evening, an official email from the Cedar Heights HOA arrived in Jamal's inbox. The subject line read, "Urgent, Community Disciplinary Review Scheduled." He clicked it open. The email detailed an emergency board meeting set for Friday. Karen Mallory's name was front and center. A formal review of her behavior was scheduled, citing multiple code violations, neighbor complaints, and evidence of misconduct. Attached was a copy of the original complaint Nate had submitted. But more importantly, there were now 3 other statements from neighbors. Anonymous, but clear. She had harassed them too, intimidated them, threatened fines or violations over made-up rules. The dominoes were falling. Still, Jamal didn't celebrate. He knew how people like Karen operated. She would never go down quietly, not while there was still a shred of control to claw at. And he was right. On Wednesday morning, his doorbell rang. He opened it to find Karen standing on his porch, hair pulled back tight, dressed like she was headed to a courtroom. Her expression was forced calm, a mask that barely concealed the panic underneath. "We need to talk," she said. Jamal didn't move. "About what?" "I came to apologize," she said, rehearsed and rigid. "This whole thing has gotten out of hand." "Out of whose hand?" he asked. Karen pressed her lips together. "Look, we can settle this. You don't need to pursue legal action. It's bad for both of us. It makes the neighborhood look unstable." He blinked slowly. "You didn't care about stability when you were swinging a bat at my mailbox." She ignored that. "I'm willing to make a public statement. I'll say it was a misunderstanding. You drop the complaint and we move on." Jamal tilted his head. "You're not here to apologize. You're here to bargain." "I'm offering you peace." "No," he said. "You're offering me silence." Karen's jaw tensed. "Do you really want to ruin my reputation?" "You already did that yourself." "I could sue you for that shock trap, for emotional distress. You know that, right?" Jamal took a step closer, voice low and even. "Then go ahead. Try me. I've got lawyers, footage, and the law on my side. And now, I've got the public too." She stood frozen. Then, like a switch flipped, the mask cracked. Her shoulders slumped, and for a split second she looked human, small, scared. "You don't understand what it's like to lose everything," she whispered. Jamal didn't respond right away. He stared at her, long and hard. "No," he finally said, "but I do know what it's like to have everything you've worked for threatened by someone who thinks you don't belong." Karen swallowed, then turned without another word. Jamal closed the door. That night, the local news ran a follow-up. Karen Mallory had been formally removed from the Cedar Heights HOA board, pending further review. The station ran side-by-side footage, Karen striking the mailbox and the moment she saw the blinking camera light. Her scream echoed over a voiceover about community accountability. Jamal sat in the dark, remote in hand, the glow from the TV dancing across his living room. He didn't cheer, he didn't gloat, he just breathed. Finally, it felt like justice wasn't just a concept, it was real, tangible, and the woman who tried to humiliate him in silence had now been exposed for the world to see. Friday came like a storm cloud. The HOA disciplinary review was scheduled for 5 p.m. sharp in the same clubhouse where Jamal had first stood his ground. This time, though, the room was packed. Neighbors filled the folding chairs, arms crossed, eyes watchful. Some were here for answers. Others were just here for the show. Jamal entered with Nate at his side, dressed in a simple blazer and dark jeans. No need to flex. The truth was already doing the heavy lifting. Karen arrived a few minutes later, looking brittle. Her signature pastel cardigan hung limp over her frame, and the usual smugness in her eyes had been replaced with something unfamiliar. Panic dressed up in composure. The board members sat behind a long folding table, HOA President Beverly Dunlap at the center, flanked by two other members, Stan Hargrove and Linda Cho. All retirees, all white, all visibly uncomfortable. "We're here," Beverly began, voice shaky, "to address the formal complaints brought against Mrs. Karen Mallory by Mr. Jamal Carter, and subsequently supported by 3 additional members of the community." A hush fell over the room. Nate stood first. "We've submitted the evidence, but if the board would like a refresher, I can replay the video clips showing Mrs. Mallory vandalizing my client's property, her son participating in a coordinated attack, and the clear escalation of harassment over a sustained period of time." Beverly held up a hand. "That won't be necessary. We've reviewed the footage." Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She'd brought no one, not even her son. "I want to speak," she said abruptly. Linda glanced toward her, surprised. "You'll have your turn, Mrs. Mallory. Please wait." Karen stood anyway. "I've lived in Cedar Heights for 13 years. I've organized our holiday parties, fundraisers, garden tours, and now, because of one man, I'm being made into a villain." Gasps stirred across the room. One neighbor in the back muttered, "Here we go." Jamal said nothing. He watched her carefully. Karen took a breath and continued. "Yes, I lost my temper, but only because I felt provoked. He installed that mailbox like a weapon. Who does that? Who shocks people?" "You broke the law, Karen," someone in the crowd called out. Karen's eyes flared. "He rigged it." "It's legal," Nate interjected calmly. "Tested, certified, and approved under Indiana state law. Not enough voltage to injure, just to deter." Karen's voice rose, desperation cracking through. "He embarrassed me. He turned this entire community against me." "No," Beverly said quietly, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You did that." Karen froze. Beverly turned to Jamal. "Mr. Carter, is there anything else you'd like to say before the board reaches a decision?" Jamal stood slowly. His voice was steady, collected. "I didn't move here to fight," he said. "I moved here for peace. And for a long time I tried to ignore what was happening. But silence doesn't stop people like Karen. If anything, it gives them permission." He looked out over the room. This wasn't about a mailbox. It was about control, about power, and about a woman who thought she could define who belonged in this neighborhood. Not anymore. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone clapped. It started in the back, Camille, probably, and spread like wildfire. Applause filled the room, not loud, but full of resolve. The kind of clapping that said, "We've had enough." Karen's face drained of color. Beverly banged her gavel once. "Order, please." The applause quieted. "This board hereby suspends Karen Mallory's membership in the HOA for a period of 12 months, effective immediately," Beverly announced. "During this time, she is barred from attending meetings, issuing fines, or representing the HOA in any capacity." Karen gasped. "You're siding with him?" "No," Stan Hargrove said from his seat. "We're siding with the truth." Karen stumbled back, then caught herself. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, the mask broke. She wasn't smug. She wasn't righteous. She was just small. She turned, walked out without another word, and the door thudded shut behind her. The meeting was adjourned, but no one moved. Finally, Beverly stood again. To the rest of the community, we failed to act sooner. That's on us. But we will do better, starting now. Later, on the sidewalk outside, Jamal stood beneath the fading orange sky as neighbors approached him, one by one, with apologies, gratitude, or quiet nods of support. Even the ones who had once looked through him now looked at him. For real. Camille joined him with 2 paper cups of coffee. "Well," she said, handing him one, "you just officially became the most famous guy in the neighborhood." He smiled. "That wasn't the goal." "I know, but sometimes the fight chooses you." Jamal nodded, sipping his coffee as the wind shifted. For the first time in weeks, it didn't carry tension. It felt clean, free. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the final chapter. It was only the start of something bigger. It should have ended there. After the hearing, after the suspension, after Karen walked out in disgrace, Jamal thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the last of it. But it wasn't. The next week brought silence. No glares from across the street, no passive-aggressive notes, no more mystery trash. It was almost peaceful, until Tuesday night. Jamal was in his garage cleaning out storage bins when he heard it. The crunch of tires on gravel, slow and deliberate. He stepped outside, saw nothing, then glanced at the street. A dark sedan crept past his house and parked 3 doors down. He couldn't see the driver. Tinted windows, no plates. His stomach tightened. That same car had rolled by the day before. He hadn't thought much of it. But now it felt intentional. He went inside, pulled up the camera feeds. Nothing obvious, but something felt off. Karen was gone, sure, but her silence felt more calculated than defeated. The next day, Camille confirmed it. "She's not done," she said, voice low as they walked down the sidewalk. "I heard from one of her old friends, someone in the garden club. Karen's been saying the neighborhood turned on her because of outsiders, and that she plans to take back control." Jamal exhaled. "Of what? She lost. It's over." Camille gave him a look. "People like her don't believe in losing. They believe in waiting." That night, Jamal added 2 more cameras, one at the end of his driveway, the other angled toward the main road, just in case. And it was a good thing he did, because on Thursday morning he found the mailbox vandalized again, not smashed, not ripped apart, but tagged, a single word spray-painted across the steel in red letters. "Leave." He stood there, jaw clenched, fists balled at his sides. Camille saw it first as she walked her dog. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What kind of coward?" "It's not just vandalism now," Jamal said. "It's a threat." He called the police. Officer Owens was back within the hour, examining the damage. "We're treating this as a hate incident," Owens said, writing on his pad. "The footage will help. And if Karen's connected, it changes things." Jamal stared at the word, still gleaming wet in the morning sun. "She won't stop until someone makes her." "You already did," Owens replied. "Now it's our turn." That evening, Jamal received a knock at the door. A man stood there, mid-50s, white, with thinning hair and anxious eyes. Jamal had seen him before, 2 houses down, always quiet. "I just want to say," the man said, clearing his throat, "I saw the car, the one that parked near your house the last few nights. I didn't say anything before, but I saw Karen's son in it. He waited until after dark. Then he drove off." "Thank you," Jamal said, surprised. "Why tell me now?" "Because I should have told you sooner, and because my wife, she said if I didn't, I was part of the problem." The man handed him a piece of paper, a scribbled note with the license plate and date he'd seen the car. And just like that, Jamal had a new piece of the puzzle. He forwarded the info to Nate and Owens, along with the video clips. 2 days later, Karen's son was arrested. Charges included conspiracy to intimidate, vandalism, and accessory to harassment. The red paint on Jamal's mailbox matched a half-empty can found in the trunk of his sedan. The gloves he used still had faint residue. Karen wasn't arrested, but the investigation shifted focus onto her again. A restraining order was issued, barring her from coming within 200 feet of Jamal's home. That was the moment it truly changed, the moment the neighborhood finally stopped pretending. Neighbors who had stayed silent started knocking on Jamal's door. Apologies, offers of support. One woman brought over a pie. A teenager down the block offered to repaint the mailbox. Even Stan Hargrove, the old board member, dropped by. "I served in the Navy," he said. "Thought I understood justice. But watching how long it took people here to act, that was a wake-up call. You shouldn't have had to fight this hard." Jamal didn't smile. He appreciated the gesture, but he wasn't here for pity. He was here to rebuild something better, not just for himself, but for anyone who came after. That night, he stood out front with Camille, both sipping from plastic tumblers of wine. "Funny," she said. "A few weeks ago, you were just the guy with the cool porch." He chuckled. "And now you're the guy who changed everything." The air was cool, the sky endless above them, and for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt it in his bones. Something was shifting, and this time it was for good. 2 weeks later, the moving truck pulled up to Karen's house. No announcement, no goodbye. Just quiet chaos as boxes were shuffled from porch to pavement, the last remnants of a woman who once ruled the neighborhood, like she owned the deed to everyone's dignity. Jamal watched from his porch, arms crossed over his chest. Camille sat beside him, a glass of iced tea sweating in her hand. "I didn't think she'd actually leave," she said. "She didn't have a choice," Jamal replied. "Not after the restraining order. Not after the HOA cut her loose. She lost everything she used to hold over people's heads." A few neighbors stood nearby, watching in awkward silence as Karen's final cardboard boxes disappeared into the truck. No one helped. No one waved. She stepped out last, alone, wearing a pair of oversized sunglasses that did little to hide the shame etched across her face. Her mouth was tight, jaw locked. She didn't look at anyone, not even Jamal. But before she climbed into the passenger seat of the car that would take her away, she paused. Just for a moment. Then, as if her pride couldn't take it, she turned her back to the street, got in and shut the door. The car rolled off the curb, tires crunching slowly down the lane, past the steel-reinforced mailbox that had stood unbothered through everything. A monument to endurance, a middle finger wrapped in concrete. And then she was gone. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was clean, free. Jamal let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, not one of triumph, but release. This wasn't about beating Karen. This was about surviving her and making sure she couldn't do it to anyone else. "You did it," Camille said softly. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. She smiled. "Maybe, but you were the first one who didn't look away." The neighborhood felt different now. The next HOA meeting was more crowded than any in recent memory. People came early. They listened. They asked questions. No one raised their voice. And when Jamal was nominated for a board seat by 3 separate neighbors, the vote wasn't even close. He didn't run because he wanted power. He ran because now he could protect the kind of peace he'd been denied when he first moved in. The first motion he passed? A new community code. Any form of racial harassment or intimidation, verbal, physical, or implied, would result in immediate investigation and possible expulsion from the HOA. No more warnings, no more hiding behind bylaws. Camille later told him that one of the neighbors who used to avoid him stopped her on a walk and said, "I didn't speak up before, but I'm glad he didn't give up." That stuck with Jamal, because for every Karen who thought silence was permission, there were 5 others who were just waiting for someone brave enough to speak first. He hadn't asked to be that person. But sometimes life doesn't ask. Sometimes it just hands you a busted mailbox and waits to see what you're going to do about it. And Jamal? He built something no one could knock down. Not with a bat. Not with a lie. Not with hate. That's the truth of this story. It's not just about one man and one petty neighbor. It's about standing firm when the world tells you to shrink. It's about choosing dignity over compliance and justice over comfort. And if you're reading this, if you're watching this, if it made you feel something, then you know what to do. Speak up, stand tall, and never, ever back down when someone tries to tell you you don't belong. Because you do. We all do. If this story moved you, like and share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful real-life stories that expose injustice and celebrate those who refuse to be silenced. Let's keep telling the truth, and let's keep building what they can't tear down.